Welcome to Transformational Pathways, a podcast created by Toastmasters District 46 in the greater New York area, where we share conversations from influencers within the Toastmasters community and people whose lives have positively transformed by walking down the Toastmasters path. Whether you're just getting started in your career, have had recent career changes, or you're navigating different languages, we're here to help you build confidence by discovering new tools, overcoming your fears to find your voice, and engaging in a thriving community. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello! Welcome to another episode of Toastmasters District 46 Transformational Pathways podcast. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and walking the pathway with me today is our guest, Matthew Fay. Matthew is a comedian who has performed stand-up, improv, and sketch. He has performed at venues such as the People's Improv Theater and UCB, as well as open mics at venues like the Laughing Buddha. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Matthew, not everyone in the world up and decides one day that they want to be a comedian, let alone doing things like open mics. I took a stand-up comedy class back when I was 12, like 11 years ago, and I had my routine that I practiced, and my right leg was quaking on that stage as I attempted to make jokes in front of a friendly audience. And it was a little bit humiliating as I walked off the stage having barely made people chuckle. I swore I would never do it again. I learned that comedy was the hardest thing in the world. And honestly, I bet a lot of folks that are listening to this or watching it, particularly in their work environments, are afraid to crack a joke at all, especially in a meeting or something like that. How on earth did you decide that this was something you had to do? Why?
So that's an interesting question. Interestingly enough, part of the reason I started doing it is similar to the reason I started doing Toastmasters, which was just I really wanted to be more open of a person. When I was younger, I was actually a very shy, like around age 12, I would never have thought to do stand-up at all. Like I was a very, very shy, very, very insulated person. And one day, I think it was my sophomore or my senior year of high school, junior or senior year of high school, I just decided that I really wanted to be more open. I felt like I had been too cloistered. I had been too in myself for most of my high school career. And I just kind of gave it a go. I had liked stand-up for a while, particularly George Carlin, who my dad introduced me to. And so one day, I was the head of a club. It was a comic book club that nobody came to, which is fine. We don't have to talk about it. And I started doing announcements for this club in my school's equivalent of our auditorium. And I just started turning them into little like routines. I just started making jokes about it. And they killed. Like the whole room started laughing. I don't think that material would work at an open mic, but it made people laugh. And that just was fun. That was fun to be able to get up and make people laugh. And people came up afterward and said, like, oh, my God, you're so funny. And so I just kept doing that. And whenever we had a club meeting, I'd go up, I'd make an announcement. I just kind of turn it into a bit. And more often than not, it killed. There's a story in there. One time it got me in trouble, but we can talk about that. Other than that, I like to joke with people. I got canceled when I was like 17 years old. It's fine. And... But it was just a lot of fun. And then I continued it when I went to college. There was my first year of college, I went and did like a proper actual comedic open mic. And I was terrified clearly because at this point I had just been making like high schoolers laugh and teachers who felt the need to laugh because they wanted to be nice to the students. And I did the reverse of what normally happens. Normally what happens is you go to your first mic, you bomb, and then you do better the second time. I did actually pretty well at this first mic. I'm like, oh, hey, people were laughing. They were having a great time. And I think I got a little in my head about it. And so I did another mic about a week later and totally bombed. Just like an absolute, It was just a mess. And so in a way, it was a humbling moment because I really felt like, oh, man, I'm real good at this. And then that second mic came up, and I'm like, okay, maybe I do need to work on it like everybody else.
Well, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, I cut you off. We'll get into an argument about that right here and now. Question: when you say bombed, what does that look like? Like, did people actually heckle and boo, or was there just that uncomfortable silence that fills the air?
Bombing is usually that horrible feeling of just absolute silence. It's not even people heckling. Also, people can heckle you when you're doing well. Like, hecklers don't need an excuse to heckle.
Right.
But a bomb specifically refers to just the awful silence that follows a joke. And if it's a really bad bomb, that follows the next joke and the next joke and the next joke. Where basically maybe you'll get a pity laugh or two, but it's mostly just silence. So you deliver this joke that you put your heart and soul into, and you kind of go like, and just nothing. It's just quiet, which is it's a type of humiliation you just have to get used to. Like, I used to absolutely just get, when I bombed, I used to just like go and limp home for a couple of days. And you just have to get to a point where you bomb, you just let it roll off you, and then you walk off. Because what I found, and what most people will tell you, is people will respect you if you bomb and then go, whatever, and then walk off, than if you slowly start to like cave in on yourself mid-bomb. Because oddly enough, stand-up is fairly tribal, I should say, in that people are watching for weakness. So if you show that you're getting more and more insecure as you're bombing, people will latch onto that. Hecklers will latch onto that. So the point is, if you are bombing, just don't give any indication that you care that you're bombing. And people will really respect that, honestly, more so than they will if you get upset about it.
But how do you even handle that? You've cracked your joke, and there's dead silence. And what do you even do? Do you just act like nothing happened and then move on to the next joke? And because you have to be having an emotional reaction. Have you ever forgotten what the next joke was, or caught up in that moment? What do you do?
I've definitely forgotten jokes because for whatever reason I put a whole lot of stake on like this is going to be a great opener. It doesn't work, and that just throws off the whole routine. And you just have to get to a point where that doesn't happen. And what I generally do is I'll say a joke, it doesn't work. It can be as simple as like, all right, we'll try another one. Honestly, the more fun you have with bombing, the more fun it'll. I've heard people who have completely bombed jokes but saved it by what they said after a joke bombed. So they actually got laughs after they said something. So basically what they'll have, and I think this is a good thing to have, is they'll have one-liners for when they bomb. They'll bomb a joke and they'll say like, well, you know what? My mom loved that joke. And that might get a laugh. Or something like that. Maybe not that necessarily. And that can save a routine from being complete silence if you're just being jokey and funny after it bombs. So you bomb, you'd be like, whatever, let's try another one, or you just do it in a fun way. It can make it feel less painful for everybody if you give the indication that you're having fun with this and not, you're terrified inside. Anybody who's bombing is terrified inside. Yeah. But if you can just give the impression that you're having fun with this, then the audience will feel like they're having fun too, and you might be able to save a routine from absolutely being just dead silent, and you might get some laughs off of the bomb. So,
well, two things embedded in that I want to ask you about. First of all, what you mentioned in passing was that having a joke to save yourself after the disaster joke occurred saves not only yourself from discomfort, or at least minimizes that discomfort, but it also minimizes the discomfort that the audience has. So are you saying that the audience wants to be able to laugh, but when there's a joke that's not funny and they're just sitting there looking at you, they're feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah. I got this great bit of advice from, I actually took a kind of like lecture, shall I say. She was giving a lecture from a comedian named Cameron Esposito. It was kind of like a Zoom lecture series. Mm-hmm. And she made the very good point that the audience wants to feel like you're in control of the room. They don't want to feel like they're watching somebody collapse in on themselves. So anything you can do to make them feel uncomfortable, like, guys, it's cool, I don't care, I'm not upset, you don't have to feel upset. Because when someone's on stage, how they're feeling can be pretty contagious. Basically, if they get the sense that you're freaking out, they're going to feel deeply uncomfortable. It's like in any social scenario where maybe you're out and open and you watch somebody who's having a breakdown. That's an uncomfortable feeling. Like you don't nobody enjoys watching somebody break down. And if you do, then maybe reevaluate yourself. But you want to give the audience permission to feel comfortable, even if you're not doing well. Because the more you can control the room like that, the more you can get up there and say, like, even if I'm bombing, I'm in control because I'm laughing it off, that'll alleviate some of the tension in the audience. And yeah, you just want to alleviate the tension as much as possible, because if you don't, and it's just a deeply uncomfortable 5 minutes, that's what people are going to be saying, like, wow, that was really uncomfortable. But if you lighten it up as you're bombing, people will be like, hey, those jokes didn't work, but that was still funny. That guy was still funny. And then, so they can tell that you're a funny guy, but maybe this material just isn't working for them, or it's new stuff you're trying out. But I'd say it's always better to try and win the audience over in some way, just so they're not feeling absolutely mortified by watching somebody go through a pretty unparalleled kind of humiliation.
So I want the viewers and the listeners to hold on to everything that you just said, because we're going to circle back to it in a minute. But before that, I want to get to another point that you made during the discussion that we had before we went to that last point, which is you also talked about, and this was embedded in what you just said as well, too, it's important or helpful to come up with something funny to say when that bomb occurs as a way of sort of rescuing the situation. And the reason why I wanted to go back to that particular statement, leaving aside how the audience might be feeling, it seems to me that what you're talking about in a comedy context is actually some pretty good advice about public speaking generally. We all have had situations, well, those of us that are in the speaking world, or those of us that work in companies where you have to stand up and give a presentation, which is many people, or to pitch your company or your services to another company that you want to sell to, where you have an embarrassing moment, or where something ridiculous happens, or you look down and all of a sudden you realize that there's a big stain on your shirt or something. And if I'm correct, that lack of comfort and that interplay between the audience, it seems to me that what you're saying, and this could be a useful tool for Toastmasters, is to be thinking about comedy as a tool to spontaneously deal with problems during public speaking. But am I just putting words in your mouth for you?
No, I think that's actually very astute. There are whole books. I used to work in a bookstore. There are whole books about how comedy can just help you in your corporate life and your professional life. And the reason being is that comedy, or the ability to laugh at oneself, I know that sounds like a cliche, like, you should have the ability to laugh at yourself. But what it indicates is confidence. It indicates, because confidence is not just about lifting yourself up, it's also about being able to acknowledge your flaws, but not in such a way that you are overly criticizing yourself. It's like comedy is a way of acknowledging your flaws while also lifting yourself up at the same time. And it implies a certain amount of confidence, but also a certain amount of self-awareness, which people really like to see, not just in your work context, but in any context. My favorite people are the people who are able to laugh at themselves, and if they do something wrong, or they, in public speaking, if they say something wrong, they can just kind of quickly laugh it off and then move on. Because again, it's all about control. In any public speaking situation, the audience is going to feel more comfortable if they feel like the person talking is in control. And comedy is a way of indicating that you're in control by being able to summon a certain emotional response from somebody, even when you're screwing up. So let's say you miss a line while you're talking, you get lost in your speech. If you can quickly just kind of make a joke and be like, oh, well, where was I? Right, there. Then you can, or just, find a way to make it funny, then it still indicates that you're in control. And that is really, really powerful to me in any public speaking situation. Just letting the audience know, whether it be a TED Talk or an open mic, if you can let people in the audience know that you're in control, they're going to feel more comfortable and they're going to enjoy it more, basically. So that's how it's just a matter of confidence.
I love it. Now, you mentioned on the subject of making mistakes or having challenges, as we might say during an evaluation in Toastmasters, that there was a high school story about a bomb that you had. Yeah, I'm not going to let that slip.
It's going to be told. It's funny because it wasn't technically a bomb. It got a good response. It was just not material that, shall we say, was safe for work. It wasn't it was high school humor. And basically I said a naughty word or two in my announcement because what happened was I was quoting an infamously bad comic, which is known for one particularly bad line. It was a meme back when I was in high school. It's not so much anymore. And so I was quoting this as an example of a really bad comic, and I quoted that line, which was a huge meme at the time, but it has a bad word in it. I won't say the word, but it's got a bad word in it. And the teachers didn't like that I went up and said a swear word in front of the high school, despite the fact that what do they think high schoolers are saying the second they walk into the auditorium? I don't know. Trust me, it wasn't one of the bad ones. Like it was a pretty tame one. It wasn't like the F word or the SH word. It was a pretty tame swear word, but clearly that was against the school's rules. And so what happened was I got banned from making announcements for 2 weeks, which again I like to joke was like I got my cancellation out early, and so yeah, it was. So it wasn't that I bombed. I actually people laughed at it. It just the material. I didn't read the room, shall I say, given that there were a bunch of teachers in the back who probably had more sensitive, mindsets and tender sensibilities, shall we say, who didn't appreciate that one word. And it's fine. I didn't make a fuss. I came back 2 weeks later and kind of joked about the fact that I got banned. That, if we want to talk about joking about your failings, I went up and I joked about the fact that I got banned 2 weeks ago. So,
did you get in trouble again?
No, because it was kind of snotty. Basically, what happened was I went up and I almost said the word again, and then I had my friend come up and put his arm around my face and drag me off stage. So I said what was that word again? Oh, right. And then he came up and grabbed me and basically gong showed me off stage. So it was a joke that referenced the fact that I had gotten banned for making this word without actually saying the word.
Right,
so it
right.
It was a little spiteful, but not in a super aggressive way.
So when I took that stand-up comedy class on the topic of bombing, the instructor told us at the beginning 2 things. First of all, don't be making fun of people, and we'll talk about that whole thing a little bit later in the show. And then she also said, remember and be sensitive to who and what your audience is, which is what you were just talking about, reading the audience. So I only say squeaky clean words. I've never uttered anything inappropriate in my life, even when I was... Well, I've never said anything wrong. And so I couldn't really relate to this. But she said, it's going to be in the afternoon when we have our show. And the afternoon crowd tends to be like people's grandmas. And you say the wrong thing and grandma will walk out of the room. Or it'll be people coming in for a good laugh after church. And after they've done their praying and had their, had their moment of really feeling at one with God, are they going to want to hear you, saying things that are inappropriate? And so the lesson that I learned in that, but I think is again a bigger public speaking thought matter that you may have something to say on, and you embedded in what you said was exactly this: reading the room. How can we as Toastmasters leverage the Toastmasters process to learn how to read the room? How did you learn how to read a room?
I mean, it's interesting because you're always kind of learning how to do that. But you want to talk about reading the room, I should mention that second mic that I bombed at in college, the reason I bombed was because it was primarily older people. And I didn't know that going into it. And I had just done a bunch of jokes for a bunch of college kids. and didn't understand the vital rule, which is what works for one crowd doesn't work for another. So I tried to deliver, and they weren't offensive jokes, but they were jokes about like being a college student, which nobody in their 70s is going to relate to at the time. I mean, they used to be at some point probably, but that's not who they are now. And what I should have done was I walked in, I see that it's an older crowd, and then tried to fix up my routine to more tailor to that crowd. Because what you don't want to do is you want to stay true to yourself. You want to keep your jokes. You don't want to tailor them based on what you think people will or won't like. There's a rule, I think BJ Novak said it, or I heard somebody say it, which was you perform the jokes that you like and you keep the jokes that they like. But even that being said, generally you can do better if you tailor your jokes, or at least pick certain jokes over other jokes, depending on who the crowd is. And I can totally relate to a mid-afternoon mic where it's mostly people's grandmothers, as you said, or people coming out of church. It's a staple in comedy that midday shows are terrible. It's always just it's either that crowd or it's people who are eating lunch who are just not really in the mood for comedy. Normally around 6 or 7 is when like the comedy time starts to set in. Like late night, for whatever reasons, is better for comedy for people. Probably because they just feel less inhibition to laugh at things. Using that in a Toastmasters context, though, I think what's great about Toastmasters is it doesn't just give you skills in how to talk to people. It gives you skills in how to listen to people. So it's a very conversational aspect to it as well. And so you can get a sense of, even if it's just in your club or if you're in a room, you can get a sense of what people in this room or what people in this group, what they're sensitive about, what might work with them, what might not, get a sense of the age range, things like that. So, I mean, we talk about how Toastmasters makes you a better communicator, but it's not just a one-sided conversation. It makes you a better communicator going both ways as well. It makes you a good speaker, but also makes you a good listener. There's a lot of exercises I know we do in meetings. It's all about listening to somebody, whether it be a table topic or others. And generally being a good listener is also a good part of learning how to read the room, because maybe you're about to go up in comedy and you hear somebody do a joke that's similar to your joke. It doesn't go over well. Or maybe they liked one thing or they didn't like another. And you kind of, even if it's a dark room, you can kind of get a sense of what people are feeling, what they like, what they don't like. So it's a continuous exercise. You're never going to master it because you're never going to be in every single room in the world. But you can develop an instinct to get a sense of who are these people, what are they liking, what are they here for, what might they like to hear. And I think Toastmasters is great at that, in just making you both a good speaker and a good listener. And I think that's important in any room where you're going to be talking to people, is knowing who these people are or just getting a first impression of who they are.
How and why did you end up getting involved in Toastmasters? Though you're already up there making people laugh, or on very rare occasions, not making them laugh. Why would someone like you decide, I need to join Toastmasters?
I got introduced to Toastmasters by a mutual friend of ours, Duncan Leaf, who was in Roosevelt Island Toastmasters. I should say that Duncan and I have this in-joke among us, and that basically any group I joined is because of him, and that he's just very good. I mean, basically, I joined track and cross-country because of him in high school. I joined my fraternity in college because of him. Basically, if he says, hey, you should go out and try this, I trust his judgment that I should at least go out and try it. And so he tells me about Toastmasters, the group. It's this public speaking group he's a part of. I've heard of it before. I've heard him mention it. And he goes, you should give it a try. I think you'd enjoy it. And I knew what the group was about. I knew that it was a public speaking group. And I also knew that I joined at a time when we had all been inside for a while. And so I kind of felt like my public speaking was, at a low, as I'm sure a lot of people felt. We're all just only now kind of leaving our houses again and learning how to talk with people in public. But I had not had an opportunity to really not just be out in public with people, but I clearly had not been on stage in a while. And so I felt like I was becoming a worse communicator because I was spending all of my time inside, basically with me and the people I was living with. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I wanted to really just get back into the habit of communicating with people again, whether it be prepared or just in any context. I wanted to just start talking to people again. But what I also wanted to do is and this is something that I've struggled with stand-up, is the best stand-ups are the people who don't view it as a performance. They view it as just like basically any conversation you'd have with anybody. I generally tend to stick very strongly to, this is the script I have, these are the jokes I'm going to read, and if I deviate from that, I get thrown off. The goal, though, is to get to a point where you can, if you wanted to, you could throw the jokes out and just go up there and talk to people for 5 minutes. That's how comfortable you need to be really good at it, because it shouldn't feel like you're reading from a script. It should be like you're having a talk with people, and, oh, by the way, here's a joke. But it should very much feel like basically a table topics. It should just feel like you are communicating with people freely and not like you're sticking very strongly to a script. So that was something I wanted to learn how to do, was to be able to just be very free and open in communication and not be in my head too much, basically. I felt Toastmasters would be a great way to get out of my head, not just for stand-up, but for sketch and for any performance where you can get really hung up on thinking about what you're going to say instead of just going with your instincts and just communicating freely. And so that's really what I wanted to get better at. And so far, I feel like I have. I feel like especially table topics as an exercise has really taught me how to get out of my head, which is something that, again, I've struggled with for many years. It's just a habit I have. I just tend to get anxious, and I tend to try to over-prepare things instead of just being free-flowing and just having a conversation with somebody and just enjoying it. And so that's something that Toastmasters has really done for me, is just really helped me get out of my head when I talk.
That's a powerful thing to have had the opportunity to work on. Before we move on into a little bit more detail about this, I wanted to talk briefly about Duncan Leaf and him bringing here, because this is a theme that has come up repeatedly in this podcast. Some of our guests have joined because they realize they have a challenge that they want to resolve, or because in one case, like a recent guest, Christina Perron, she wanted to just get involved in extracurricular activity, and Toastmasters happened to be a convenient time when she was in college, and she was hooked. You joined because someone told you about it and explained why it might be right for you. And that's one thing about Toastmasters that I want to emphasize, which is the most powerful recruitment tool that we have is the evangelization that can happen through our own membership. And so I want to just use this as a PSA to anyone watching or listening who is a Toastmaster. If you know anyone in your life, even if it's someone who's out there speaking all the time, like Matthew Fay was, talk to them about Toastmasters, help them come aboard. The benefits will be shocking probably to both you and that person, and it's the best way to share with others what you're benefiting from by being a part of this amazing organization. Back to your main point. Talk to us a little bit about Pathways. Pathways, for those of you who are not Toastmasters, is the educational curriculum, and it's a customized one that people that are new members sign up for, and then you follow it as your Toastmasters journey progresses. And your pathway is one that a lot of people don't even know about, but it's actually a really cool one. So explain to us how Pathways was for you and what pathway you ended up being on.
So Pathways has been a very helpful tool for me because I for one, am a visual learner, and that I definitely do better when I have, something guiding me visually, either at work or just like a planner, something that keeps me on track, that shows kind of the progress I'm making in a particular exercise or a particular goal. I just like to have it, even like a big billboard, a string attached to it, just like
right.
Visual cues are important to me. And so something that Pathways has done for me, which I find very helpful, is just showing me the steps. And by the way, my path is speaking with humor. And it just basically shows me how to gradually progress through this journey by exploring basically how to apply humor to different types of speaking, whether it be an icebreaker or whether it be more of an informational speech. It's all about kind of exploring the range of ways you can apply humor to different types of speeches, because I can't think of a single type of speech that wouldn't and benefit some way from humor, whether, again, it's just you're introducing yourself or you're giving a speech on a topic. generally humor is a way to just bring people back in and to just kind of make it more fun. And so Pathways has been really helpful for that. And that it's just about this. You start with this type of speech, whether it be an icebreaker, you move on to this one, you move on to this one, and it just really kind of expands your horizons in terms of thinking, where can I apply humor into what kind of speaking? But also, it's just a good goal. It's a good way to set your goals and how to keep track of your goals. So once you've accomplished something, okay, I've done this. What's the next goal? How does what I learned in this goal apply to this next goal? It's just a very effective way of visualizing basically your cumulative experience and your cumulative knowledge as you're going along your particular pathway. So to me, it's been very helpful in terms of just organizing both my thought process and my long-term planning for Toastmasters and how to get the most out of my pathway.
How has it helped your development as a comedian?
It's helped my development probably just in terms of showing that there's really no situation. I mean, there are situations you shouldn't apply humor, clearly. But in terms of speaking, in terms of the types of speech you're given, I found myself at one point afraid that, maybe for this type of speech, which is whatever type of speech, maybe it's better to be straightforward and it's better to just not apply humor here. Mm-hmm. But it really just shows you that if you pick a particular pathway and this pathway is defined by a particular goal, there's really nothing there's no type of speech you can't apply this goal to. Mm-hmm. But in terms of my pathway, in terms of speaking with humor, it really just got me into the habit of thinking, like, whenever I'm talking, whenever it's appropriate, and whenever it's effective, how can I make this funny? And that's also just something that's very important if you work in comedy is, again, quoting back to that comedian I mentioned, Cameron Esposito, she said she's gotten to the point where she dreams in jokes. Like, literally, she's dreaming and she's making jokes. That's just how natural the idea of being funny has come to her, no matter what she's doing, unless, of course, again, reading the room. There are certain situations, a funeral, unless it's somebody you know really well, maybe don't bring out your material. But for the most part, there are very few situations where you can't apply this particular pathway. If, in my case, applying humor, I could be making a joke. I could be making a presentation at work. I could be meeting somebody for the first time. It really just, to me, it makes an instinct out of your pathway. You think, well, how can I apply humor to this in a beneficial way? So that's something that pathway really does. It helps create an instinct out of whatever your particular goal is, so that whenever you're out speaking, whether it be professionally or in a formal setting or just very casually, it helps train you to think about that pathway while you're speaking, so you can really just hone it and make it feel very natural and just a part of your daily communication.
Tell us about your icebreaker, which for those who are not Toastmasters but who might be watching or listening, that's the very first speech someone gives in Toastmasters. Were you nervous when you gave it, or did you just know you would go in there and kill it? How did you decide what topic it should be?
Yeah, the icebreaker was interesting for me. I think I was a little nervous just because anytime you speak in front of people you haven't spoken in front of before, you don't know what to expect. And so for my icebreaker, I don't know why this was on the brain at the time. Maybe it was just because of the fact that we had been stuck inside for so long. My icebreaker was about the summer immediately after I graduated from college, in which I spent 3 months basically living by myself in an apartment in Saratoga Springs, New York, for an internship. I had gone up there for an internship. I had an apartment, and I lived in that apartment by myself. So on the outside, it would look like to most people a very lonely experience, because I basically, the only people I knew were from work. I had a friend who came up every other weekend because he was going to school there anyway. But other than that, I basically spent most of that summer by myself in this apartment. And I actually look on that summer very fondly. I don't look on it as this lonely period in my life. Like, that to me was a really empowering summer for me, because it was the first time in my life I was living as an adult on my own. I had to drive to go shopping for myself. Well, I was shopping for myself in college, but for other people. But I was living by myself. I was cooking for myself. I was going to get my laundry, basically living on my own as an adult for the first time. And that was a really empowering feeling. Just knowing that, like, I'm responsible for myself. I have to do all these things myself. I don't have a roommate who's going to take care of it for me. I have to go to work by myself. This is all this is all me. And so that was what my icebreaker was about, because that's what being in quarantine for a while had done. It had really brought me back to that place of, I could survive this because I've lived an entire summer by myself in an apartment. And so basically, my icebreaker was about how periods of isolation can actually be empowering. They can show you that it's not so scary to be alone sometimes. And clearly, I wouldn't recommend us being inside for another year or two. But I found it empowering to think about the fact that you can be by yourself and you can get through it. You don't have to it doesn't have to be this terrifying ordeal. Yeah. And for me, I think the fact that I had that experience in summer made the whole quarantine thing less scary for me, because I knew that I could survive on my own for a certain period of time. So my icebreaker, I think it was even called a little alone time isn't so bad. And so it's just me reflecting on that summer where I did have to be alone and learn how to be alone, and how that can be an empowering feeling so long as it's not going on for too long. Yeah. But to me, that was a really important period in my life, and that was what I opened with, basically showing why, for me, being alone at times can actually be a very empowering and a very beneficial experience.
Matthew, as of the time of this recording, the COVID pandemic is still officially ongoing. And the Delta variant of it has been the dominant strain for the past however months, most of this year, honestly. But thankfully, cases across the United States appear to be on the downswing. And here in New York, things are beginning to gradually open up again. Broadway has reopened to some extent. Some comedy clubs, my understanding, have begun to reopen. People like you, who by and large had their fields dominated by live performance, may begin to reemerge more fully into their chosen vocations and be able to take that into whatever place it will. Do you feel that you going into the reopened world will have changed by having been in Toastmasters through, at this point, the majority of the pandemic? And if so, how will that have changed you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Toastmasters has been beneficial to me in so many ways. I mean, not just with comedy, but I mean, I even just think that in my professional life, I think I'm a better speaker. I got a new job about 4 months ago that I interviewed for and had a great conversation with people. I wasn't a great interviewer before COVID happened, and I think Toastmasters has helped me become a better interviewer for jobs, better communicator in public and at work. I think overall I'm just a better communicator in general, and part of it I think is just getting out of your head with Toastmasters. But I think Toastmasters just reminded me how much I enjoy talking to people. I think there's a certain amount of joy in communication that you don't have to have, but I think you can learn to have in Toastmasters. And I think at a time when everyone is so desperate to get out again and just to be amongst people again, whether it be at a comedy club or just going to the bar, Toastmasters to me has reignited just the love of communication with people. Just talking about anything, but just being able to be out with people, to talk off the cuff about anything. I think it not only makes you a stronger speaker, as it has for me, but it also just ignites or reignites a certain passion for communication that maybe got lost while we were all inside, or maybe never went away and we're just now rediscovering. So that's what I would say Toastmasters can really give, is skills in communication, but also a certain love for communication. A love for just being able to talk with people, being able to listen to them and listen to what they have to say and comment on it. I think at a time when we can have so much struggle, it feels like there can be so much struggle communicating, whether that be because we've been inside for so long, or whether because we all feel like we're so isolated via social media. Toastmasters is a great tool for, I think, just kind of reigniting a desperate need for communication and just interpersonal relationships as we're all re-entering the world and rediscovering each other as people, I'd say. So yeah, I can't think of a time when the skills you learn in Toastmasters won't be important in your life.
Really powerfully put. Okay. Tell us a funny story. Just any. Just be Matthew Fay for a minute.
A funny story. I mean, I've got a bunch. I'm trying to think of one that came up recently. I mentioned I used to work in a bookstore, and some of the best stories that came from the bookstore were the celebrity encounters we had. Because I worked at a particular bookstore, which I don't know why, but all of these stories, well, they were stories, but all these celebrities just loved this bookstore. And I suppose I have a funny story about a time that I was just utterly starstruck, because normally I'll see a celebrity, I'll be like, oh my God, it's that person.
Right.
And then you kind of like find your composure and you get back to it. I was telling a friend about this the other day, because this actor is on Succession, which I think is currently the most popular TV show around right now. So I used to work the register at a Barnes & Noble, and part of that job is you have to call people. Like when their book comes in, you have to call them to let them know their book came in. And so every now and then I had seen a order for a person whose name was Brian Cox. Brian Cox is one of the lead actors on Succession, and I never actually got a chance to call the person. And I would kind of laugh to myself and go, oh, that's funny. It's the same name as Brian Cox. One day I got that order. I should mention, I'm a huge fan of Brian Cox. Even before Succession, I was just an absolute huge fan of him. He's a great, terrific, incredible, very versatile actor. And so I get on the phone, I dial the phone, and I hear a voice come on, and I know it's him from the second he answers the phone.
Wow.
Because I know his voice so well. And so he gets on and goes, hello? And I just freeze for like a couple seconds. Wow. I'm just like I was fully ready to be like, hi, your book's here. And I kind of go, yeah, hi, this is Matthew from Barnes & Noble. Your books arrived, because it was him. It was Brian Cox from Succession, a guy I've been a fan of for years, and I'm just talking to him on the phone. And I thought, like, is there not a rule where you're not allowed to just call up the celebrities and talk to them? So I get through to him, and I tell him his books are here. After, a full, must have been 5 seconds of silence, I just finally talk to him and tell him that his books are here. And he says, like, oh, thank you very much. And I'm just trying to be so accommodating. I'm like, yeah, I'll put them behind the counter. They'll have your name on them. And he's like, thanks. Yeah, that's great. And then he hangs up. And I just had to, like, decompress for a second. Because, again, I'm normally not, starstruck by celebrities, because I'm not having a full conversation with them. I'm not on the phone with a guy who is currently the lead actor of the most popular TV show in the country. And so I literally... You want to talk about moments where you freeze up while you're speaking. That's an example of a time when you just talk, when you find yourself talking to somebody who you are just so in awe of. And he later came in and picked up his books, and it was fine. I just kind of, he went to another person and got his books from them. But I was just talking to a friend about that, because we were talking about Succession. That is, for somebody who gets in front of people and just talks, relentlessly to them. That was one of the moments recently in the past year when I just found myself speechless, because I never thought I would just be on the phone with this guy.
Yeah.
I wonder what it must have been like for him to pick up the phone and be like, hello, and then just hear, again, like 5 seconds of silence before anybody started talking.
And it might have even been a little scary, right?
Yeah, it's just like, hello, am I being pranked, or is somebody going to ransom me? So yeah, that was a moment in which I totally just ate it from a social skills standpoint and just freaked out on the phone.
Speaking of social skills, by the way, there's one last topic I wanted us to cover. We mentioned briefly earlier that there are different shades of comedy, that it's important to read your audience and understand the mood of the audience. You also mentioned that you weren't totally you were a little bit nervous about speaking in front of Toastmasters, but that it ultimately became a place where you could rediscover your socialization during this pandemic. Talk to me a little bit about the vibe of the club that you joined. And the reason why I ask is the vibe of the clubs that people have joined has become a recurrent theme in this podcast that I'm going to explore from a different angle with you.
Sorry, Scott?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I think I missed you for a second.
That's okay.
So I love the vibe of our group because it feels... The group that we're in, the Roosevelt Island Toastmasters, I just get the sense that everybody is very... First of all, it's a very diverse group of people. It's people from all walks of life. It's people from different careers, professions, who've lived in different cities, different places across the country. So for being such a diverse group of people, it's also people who genuinely want to help each other improve, but who also genuinely are eager to talk to each other. And I think we've all been in a situation where, I don't know, maybe you try to get a group of friends together, or maybe you're introducing a whole bunch of people to each other and they just don't necessarily click, or just, I don't know, maybe they're just not thrilled about talking to each other. It happens, you go to a party and you try to, ingratiate yourself with a group of people, a circle of people, and it's just not, it's just not clicking. There's nothing wrong with it. You just, you're not necessarily clicking with these people. In our group, in Roosevelt Island Toastmasters, I never get the sense that there's anybody in that group I can't just freely talk to. If I were to go into a separate chat with any one of those people, I feel like I could talk to them openly and very freely. I feel like I could feel free to talk about something and to hear their insight on it. It's just a very attentive and very responsive group of people who are very accommodating in letting you speak, and who are also very respectful if you have something you are working on, in helping you correct that and helping you fix it. But the main thing is, the key to any group is just never feeling afraid to talk to anybody. Just like, if you can get a group together where you can feel like you can just walk up to them and start talking to them about anything, that's very important for the cohesion of any group. And that's what I love about my group, about the group I'm in. I just feel like if I go to any meeting and if I were in person with them, and I saw them over by the fountain or whatever, I could just walk up and go talk to them about anything, and they would be responsive to that, and they would want to talk back to me. And I just feel like that's a great feeling to have, knowing that you can just feel comfortable communicating with somebody. Because there are often times in your life when you'll try talking to somebody and they don't feel like communicating back. You're just kind of getting stonewalled, or just they don't feel like talking. Or maybe someone's talking to you and you don't feel like talking. And, we've all been in those situations. So just the idea of knowing that, like, I can talk to this person and they will feel comfortable talking to me, and we can have a free-flowing conversation, even if either one of us has maybe had a rough day or whatever, that's just a great feeling. It's a great, liberating, empowering feeling.
What I'm hearing is that, at a minimum, there's a sense of friendliness.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that you hinted at earlier is that in the comedy world, friendliness isn't always the value that's at the forefront. And one of the things relating to that and tying into your Pathways curriculum that I'm curious about is, being blunt, a lot of comedy out there is innocent. Some of it is slapstick. Some of it's very physical. Some of it's very intellectual and subtle. Some of it can be kind of mean-spirited. And we were talking earlier in jest about being canceled, but some of the issues that have led people to really be canceled in real life have been, for instance, making jokes about certain groups that are marginalized. Or if they haven't been outright canceled, this has been the subject of heated discussion and injured feelings and apologies and flame wars online and all that sort of stuff. Talk to me about how you feel the Pathways curriculum around comedy, or your Toastmasters experience around speech itself, jibes with or impacts how someone who wants to learn comedy might be able to navigate terrain, particularly in comedy, where, let's face it, a lot of comedians have made a lot of money with cheap shots at other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's kind of famously, it can be a very toxic field. You'll meet a lot of people who their whole style is taking shots at people, and maybe not just on stage, but off stage, they'll make crude and, in my opinion, completely unnecessary jokes about people. Yeah, it's an environment right now. There's a whole lot of debate going on right now about, what makes for the comedy scene, particularly for women who oftentimes feel very uncomfortable because they're going up with men who are making jokes at their expense or making jokes about women that are crude and gross. And it can be a very uncomfortable, uninviting space for women in general, and also basically any marginalized group, because there are lots of lots of men, shall we say, who feel that comedy is still largely about who you can attack and who you can bring down, and kind of revel in a certain amount of cruelty in their comedy. And I don't really get that. The way I kind of view comedy is you should be able to take hits, and that, again, if a heckler is heckling you, you should be able to roll with it, but you don't have to hit people. You don't have to, if a heckler attacks you, or if, somebody in the audience is being a jerk, you are not required to emotionally destroy them in front of everybody, as some people like to do. I just don't think that you have to. You have to be able to put up with a certain amount of, shall we say, meanness, but you don't have to be mean. You don't have to let yourself be mean. There are many comedians who have made wonderful careers out of not being mean. Jim Gaffigan is one of the cleanest comedians out there. You won't hear Jim Gaffigan speaking badly about people or anything like that. So you do not have to stoop to that level, shall we say. It is absolutely perfectly possible to be a nice person and be a comedian. And in terms of how Pathway affects that, I would say that in general, public speaking and communication oftentimes is about respecting your audience. In fact, I'd say stand-up comedy is probably one of the few areas where people feel like they can disrespect their audience. They feel like getting up there and absolutely destroying the people they're talking to is warranted. But you wouldn't go to a conference and start pointing people out and taking shots at them in the audience. It's pretty. You can't be giving a TED talk and be like, "Hey, look at this guy right here." That's not a good practice for most types of public speaking, which is probably why stand-up is so unique in that regard. But Pathways is about how to most effectively communicate with people, and part of that is treating your audience like intelligent adults. I remember, I think it was a Dale Carnegie line where he said, the audience doesn't want to feel like you're educating them, even if you're educating them something. They want to feel like you're reminding them of something that they already know. So basically, you're not going to go up there and be like, you don't know this, but I'm going to tell you this thing you don't know. You're going to go up and be like, now you know, blah, 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 blah. And that makes people feel like they're smart and intelligent people. And that's just a basic form of respect for your audience. So I think Toastmasters is great. Toastmasters and Pathways is great at helping you to define what your techniques and methods are for not only effectively communicating what you're saying, but how to make that resonate with your audience, not just with your passion for your topic, but I'd say your respect for your audience. Again, I'd say 95% of any public speaking engagement, you have to treat your audience like you respect them. Even if inside maybe you have an issue with them, you can't show that. And so I think Pathways is great at, again, just helping you develop techniques for how not only to communicate effectively, but how to get your audience, again, reading the room, how to get your audience to a point where they're going to be most receptive to what you're saying. And a big part of that is respect, and how to make this a topic that they can be interested in, but how to make them feel like they're being respected while they're learning about it.
I love it. So there's a pop-up question or two that I ask every guest at the end of the show, but I'm going to slightly shake it up with you. If there is a favorite comedian that you have, who is it and why? If there is a favorite leader that you have, who is it and why?
Favorite comedian? I have a lot. I don't know if I have necessarily one who stands out above all, but I'll name one of them because I'm actually trying to see him at the New York Comedy Festival in November. provided I can still get a ticket, is a comedian named Mark Maron, who, you want to talk about a great speaker. Mark Maron is the host of the WTF podcast, which is one of the best. Like, people think of him as kind of like a successor to Larry King, and that he is just an amazing interviewer. He is. Wow. He has gotten people on this podcast to talk about things they have never told anybody. Like,
powerful.
There's at least one comedian who's come out on his podcast. Really? There are comedians who have told like awful childhood stories on his podcast that they never felt comfortable telling anywhere else. You want to talk about making someone feel comfortable. Mark Maron is one of the best interviewers out there, in that he creates a setting in which people feel like they can talk to him, and that he feels like he can talk to them. So, for one, he's an amazing interviewer, but he's also just very, very funny. If you just watch him talk, and part of why I like him as a comedian is that he is somebody who has definitely grown as a comedian, and that if you watch his earlier albums and you watch his later albums, it feels like a very different person. And he will admit this. His earlier albums, he's very much subscribing to that very angry, I can't stand these types of people. I'm an angry blah, 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 blah. He embodied the like angry white guy kind of stereotype for comedy. And then in one of his albums, which is after the podcast happened, you can tell he's very much kind of mellowed out, and he's taken stake of himself. You can see, like, it's watching someone grow as an artist over the course of like 2 or 3 albums, and just very much maturing in a way where they can understand where that anger comes from and how they process it. He does a wonderful joke about how he now understands his own sense of anger. He's like, look, I used to be a really angry guy, and the way he put it, he's also just very poetic in the way he says things. He says, I now just understand that I have a river of rage running through me at all times, and it's really just up to me whether or not I put the canoe in the water. And that's just a very poetic way of saying, really I'm an angry guy, but I can choose whether or not to dip a toe in that anger. I can choose whether or not to be an angry guy. And so he can be very funny and very poetic, but also very just self-aware in the way he does things. And I like that about him. I like a comedian who can grow and who doesn't always feel like they have to be trapped by the way that things have worked before. So I very much admire him as a communicator, as a speaker, and just as a very self-aware person who has grown as an artist.
I love it.
And then in terms of a leader, I'm trying to think of somebody who I just really respect as a leader nowadays, whether it be a comedian or whether it be an artist. Who was it the other day that I was listening to? I think it was somebody from. Sorry, I'm totally blanking at the moment. But actually, you know what? I will just pick. Well, for one, Scott, I think you're a terrific leader. I hope you don't mind me bringing you up. I have always.
Those of you listening and watching, by the way, I didn't pay for that. I promise.
He did not. I promise. But I mean, I've always respected you as a leader in our club, and so I mean, Again, I'm not just trying to say this because I'm talking to you. A good part of why I stayed with Toastmasters, I mean, I was going to stay. There was no question about me leaving. But your leadership in general, your leadership in the club, and also the way in which you just made every person feel important, I think was a great part of my initial experience in Toastmasters. Sorry, I hope this doesn't feel like a cop-out, but I generally, Scott, like, we want to talk about leaders. I always admired you as a leader in terms of just making everybody in a group feel important. And I think that is important. You should make any group you're a part of, you should make everybody there feel like they have enough value that they can communicate and be a part of that group. Again, this applies to corporate meetings. I mean, Simon Sinek, who is a very respected corporate writer, he just talks about how to make the most of corporate situations and team building. He said that's a huge part of it. There's a YouTube video he did where he said it's very easy to find who the leader of any group is, and it's very easy to find who the most difficult member of any group is, because you can go to any work team, ask them who's the jerk, and they will all point to the same person.
Wow.
And if you go to them and say, who's the one person you trust the most in this group, they will also point to the same person. Because leaders tend to just kind of naturally gravitate to positions of leadership, and part of gravitating to that position is respecting the people around you and making them feel important in a way that if they are asked that question, they will point to you. They'll be like, who is somebody in this group who makes you feel important, who makes you feel like you have value in this group? And I'm sure in our group, one person they'd say is Scott Mason of Roosevelt Island Toastmasters. So, yeah, again, just sorry, Scott, I can't help it if you're a great leader in our group.
Yeah, so it's hard to shut me up, but you've done it. Thank you. I feel honored and humbled, and I'm genuinely shocked by that response. So, but you know what? One other thing I've learned through Toastmasters is to take feedback, both the negative and the positive. So thank you. Matthew, it has been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story. For those of you who are listening or watching, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review or a comment. And don't forget to follow District 46 on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you're new to Toastmasters, check out Toastmasters46.org. That's Toastmasters46.org to learn more about us or to visit one of our clubs. Because Toastmasters is where leaders are made.
Thank you so much for joining us on Transformational Pathways. If you enjoyed today's episode or got anything out of it, please rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're interested in learning more about Toastmasters District 46, check out the link in the show notes below.